"Wake up to life, you useless," said the stepmother, pouring hot coffee over the special girl, who trembled in pain. Seconds later, the door opens, and the millionaire father enters. What he does leaves everyone breathless. The morning sun streamed through the immense living room windows, painting luminous squares on the Italian marble floors, but the light always felt cold, incapable of warming the silence that lived there. In that home, built with the precision of someone who measures success in square feet, lived Helena, an 8-year-old girl whose inner world was more vast and colorful than any of the exotic landscapes hanging on the walls. Helena had her own way of feeling things. The sound of rain soothed her, but the ticking of a clock made her restless. Her way of speaking to the world was through a sketchbook and a box of colored pencils. Every line was a word, every color a feeling. Her drawings were letters that no one seemed to read. Her father, Richard, was a good man, generous at heart, but perpetually absent. He had built a staggering fortune on Wall Street. A true billionaire whose days were consumed by stock charts, calls about crypto investments, and managing a net worth that spread across different countries. He loved his daughter with a silent intensity, believing in his business-focused mind that the best love was the one that guaranteed security, the house, the toys, the best schools. It was all proof of his affection. After the loss of his first wife, he had married Veronica, a woman of stunning beauty and a practiced smile, who seemed to be the missing piece to complete the portrait of a perfect family. To the world, she was the devoted wife and caring stepmother. To Helena, she was a rain cloud forming on the horizon. Veronica's cruelty didn't arrive like a thunderstorm, but like a fine, persistent drizzle. It began with small, almost invisible gestures. One morning, Helena's little hand knocked over a glass of milk, and the shattering sound echoed through the silent kitchen. Veronica, instead of comforting her, picked up her phone. With a disguised smile, she filmed the white puddle and the shards of glass, posting the video with the caption, "My little klutz, mornings are never dull around here. Oops, family life." Her online friends commented with laughing emojis. Richard, seeing the post later, found it amusing. Only Helena felt the sting of humiliation, a cold sensation that was confirmed the next day when the other children at school mimicked her, laughing. Veronica's digital world was her weapon, and Helena, her silent victim. The humiliation, once planted, grew fast roots in the fertile soil of Helena's sensitivity. At school, the video of the spilled milk became a whisper in the hallways. Children, with the innocent cruelty of those who don't measure consequences, would imitate the sound of the glass breaking as she passed. Helena would shrink, wishing she had the power to become one of her drawings, to flatten herself onto the paper until she disappeared. Richard, on one of his rare evenings at home, saw the video and smiled, a tired smile from a man who had spent the day immersed in dividend spreadsheets and the volatile stock market. "You and your adventures, my little one," he said, stroking her hair, failing to notice that her eyes no longer sparkled. To him, it was a domestic scene, a childish slip-up. To Veronica, it was proof that her strategy was working. She could be cruel in broad daylight, and everyone would applaud, calling it modern parenting. In the classroom, her teacher, Mrs. Davis, a woman with silver hair and an observant gaze, began to notice the change. Helena, who once participated enthusiastically in art activities, now retreated into her sketchbook, drawing figures that were increasingly small and grey. The vibrant colors had vanished, replaced by somber shades. Worried, Mrs. Davis tried to talk to the girl, who only shook her head, her eyes fixed on the floor. It was then that the teacher decided to write a note, an attempt to build a bridge to the father she rarely saw. In careful handwriting, she explained Helena's sensitivity, her need for a calm and predictable environment. She thrives on routine and is startled by sudden changes. Please try to avoid loud noises and stressful situations, she wrote, folding the paper and placing it carefully in the girl's backpack. That afternoon, while Helena was in the bath, Veronica, as was her habit, inspected the backpack. She found the note and read it with ill-disguised contempt. Sensitivity, she muttered, as if the word were an insult. For a woman who saw the world as a competition, Helena's delicacy was an irritating weakness, a flaw in the perfect family project she was trying to sell. She crumpled the paper tightly, feeling it crackle between her fingers, and buried it deep in the kitchen trash can beneath vegetable peels and empty packaging. Richard would never know of that appeal for help. Helena, getting out of the bath, felt a chill run down her spine, an inexplicable feeling that a door to help had just been slammed shut. Veronica watched her from the hallway, a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. That note wasn't a warning to her, it was a challenge. If the girl needed calm, Veronica would give her a storm. She decided that Helena's education required a firmer method. This would be her new personal project, a way to mold her stepdaughter in her own image, or break her in the attempt. The first step would be to get rid of that sketchbook, the source of all that sentimental nonsense. She would wait for the perfect moment, a moment when the lesson would be unforgettable. The days that followed were marked by a tense quiet, the silence that precedes the storm Veronica was planning. Richard left for a week-long business trip to Europe, a marathon of meetings about expanding his investment funds and the fluctuating euro, leaving Helena in the exclusive care of her stepmother. For Veronica, it was the perfect opportunity. Her husband's absence meant the freedom to act without needing to keep up appearances full-time. The wealth he provided, the assets she now called her own, demanded, in her mind, flawless upkeep. And Helena's sensitivity was a stain, a disorder in that picture of perfection. The girl, with her keen intuition, felt the shift in the atmosphere. Veronica's smile was sharper, her tone of voice lower and more cutting. Helena began to treat her sketchbook like a treasure to be protected. She no longer left it on her desk. She hid it under her mattress, among her stuffed animals, in places she hoped were sacred. Her drawings became a secret diary of her fear. She drew locked doors, lost keys, and a large dark cloud hovering over the silhouette of a house. Meanwhile, at school, Mrs. Davis, receiving no response about the note, decided she needed to do more. She found the number for Richard's office and called, determined to speak with him. On the other end of the line, she was met by Clara, his executive assistant, a woman whose efficiency was a fortress. Mrs. Davis explained the situation, her voice heavy with concern, but Clara, trained to filter out the distractions from a billionaire's life, simply took the message with professional politeness. "Mr. Sterling is in important meetings overseas, but I will pass along your message as soon as possible," she said, ending the call. The message landed on a list of dozens of other, non-urgent matters. Veronica's patience ran out on a rainy afternoon. She decided to do some spring cleaning in Helena's room. It was the perfect pretext. With a cruel zeal, she opened drawers and rummaged through the closet until her fingers found the spine of the sketchbook hidden under the mattress. She pulled it out with a triumphant gesture. Helena, watching from the corner of the room, felt the air leave her lungs. "Look what we have here," Veronica said with terrifying calm. "All this sentimental clutter, a home like this, a symbol of the legacy your father has built, requires order, and this scribbling habit of yours only creates disorder." Helena reached out her hand, a silent plea, her eyes filled with tears that dared not fall. But Veronica wasn't interested in begging. She sat on the edge of the bed, flipping through the sketchbook with disdain, past the drawings of suns, flowers, and families holding hands. Then, with deliberate precision, she took hold of the first page and tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper was the only noise in the room. She tore the second and the third, page by page, Helena's world was undone before her eyes. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She stood frozen, a small statue of despair, while her only form of expression was methodically destroyed. Veronica didn't stop until the last page was torn. She stood up, leaving the pile of mutilated paper on the floor. "There, much cleaner now," she said, leaving the room and closing the door softly behind her. Helena was left alone, staring at the colorful remains of her soul scattered across the carpet. The silence that settled in Helena's room after Veronica left was heavier than any scream. The girl didn't cry. The tears seemed frozen somewhere deep inside her. With the delicacy of someone collecting the shards of something precious, she knelt on the soft rug and began to gather the pieces of her drawings. There was no hope of fixing them. It was a ritual of farewell. Each fragment of color, each broken line, was a memory of a feeling that now lay in ruins. When she was done, she put the pieces in an empty shoebox, which she hid in the back of her closet. Along with the drawings, she packed away her voice. That afternoon, Helena stopped speaking, except for the essential monosyllables that cohabitation required. Veronica interpreted the silence as submission, a victory in her campaign to forge a stepdaughter in her own image. The next day, she announced her new resolution with artificial enthusiasm. No more useless hobbies, darling. A girl in your position, heiress to such a significant legacy, needs refined skills. I've enrolled you in piano lessons." A gleaming black grand piano, which until then had served only as a decorative object in the music room, became Helena's new battlefield. The private tutor, a stern woman named Madame Dubois, came 3 times a week. Helena would sit at the bench, her back straight, her hands hovering over the ivory keys, but she wouldn't play. Her fingers refused to obey. It was a passive, silent, and unshakable resistance that drove Veronica mad. Meanwhile, miles away, Mrs. Davis felt a growing unease. The lack of response from the Sterling family was abnormal. She decided to call Richard's office one more time. Again, it was Clara who answered. "Miss Clara, it's me, Helena's teacher. I'm very worried. She hasn't been participating in class and seems withdrawn. Were you able to pass on my message?" The urgency in Mrs. Davis's voice this time breached Clara's professional barrier. She remembered the late Mrs. Sterling, a sweet woman who always said her daughter's drawings were her greatest joy. Something didn't add up. "I will make sure he receives the message on his daily call, Mrs. Davis. I promise." And for the first time, Clara marked the item on her list with a red star. That night, Richard called from Zurich. Between a meeting about the profitability of his investment funds and a business dinner, Veronica answered, her voice syrupy sweet. "Everything is wonderful, darling. Helena is doing so well in her piano lessons. A real musician in the making." She passed the phone to the girl. "Daddy wants to talk to you." Helena took the receiver, her heart pounding. "Hi, sweetie. Everything okay?" Richard asked, his voice distant, muffled by the noise of an expensive restaurant. "Yes," Helena whispered. "Are you enjoying the piano?" "Yes." Richard, satisfied with the short answers he attributed to tiredness, said a quick goodbye. He had to close a multi-million-dollar deal and couldn't be distracted. He had no idea that the most valuable asset in his life was depreciating in silence. Back at school, Mrs. Davis felt that time was running out. If the mountain won't come to Mohammed, she would have to go to the mountain. After her last class, she got into her simple car and drove to the address she found on Helena's registration form. She pulled up in front of the imposing iron gates of the mansion, her heart in her throat. She pressed the intercom button, her presence a small, fragile anomaly in the world of wealth and secrets that rose before her. The voice that answered the intercom was as smooth as velvet, but with a steel thread running through it. Yes, Veronica wasn't expecting visitors, much less a private school teacher at the gates of her fortress. For a moment, she considered making an excuse, saying they were just leaving, but curiosity and pride won out. This was a golden opportunity to neutralize a threat, to show who was in control of the narrative. "Mrs. Davis, what a pleasant surprise. Please, come in. The gate will open." She wanted the teacher to see the opulence, the wealth that surrounded her, so she would understand just how insignificant her concern was in this universe of power and money. Mrs. Davis drove slowly up the stone driveway, feeling like an intruder in a world that wasn't hers. The house wasn't just big, it was imposing, a monument to the capital Richard had amassed. Veronica greeted her at the door, a perfectly rehearsed smile on her lips. "Welcome. Can I offer you some coffee?" "Tea?" She guided the teacher to a living room that looked more like the lobby of a luxury hotel, with white sofas, abstract art, and a panoramic view of the impeccably manicured garden. All these assets seemed to scream a message of superiority. Sitting on the edge of the sofa, Mrs. Davis felt small. "Mrs. Sterling, I came because I'm genuinely worried about Helena." Veronica cut her off with a delicate gesture. "Please, call me Veronica. And I appreciate your dedication, truly. But Helena, she's going through a phase. Since losing her mother, she has these moments of withdrawal. We're trying everything. The piano, for example, was a therapeutic suggestion. I believe the discipline of music will do her good." Every word was carefully chosen to paint a picture of care and patience, while subtly dismissing the teacher's concern as an overreaction. "But what about the drawings?" Mrs. Davis insisted. And it was her way of expressing herself. She stopped completely. Veronica sighed, a theatrical sigh of an overburdened mother. "Ah, the drawings. We had to organize her room and, unfortunately, some papers got lost in the tidying up. But we're encouraging new talents." She called out, "Helena, darling, we have a visitor." The girl appeared at the doorway, her shoulders slumped, her eyes fixed on the patterns of the Persian rug. She didn't look at her teacher. "Say hello to Mrs. Davis, sweetie." Helena just mumbled something unintelligible. Mrs. Davis felt a chill. The girl before her was a ghost of the vibrant student she knew. "Helena, I miss you in art class," she said, her voice catching. Veronica placed a hand on her stepdaughter's shoulder, a gesture that looked protective but made the girl stiffen. "She's just a little shy today, aren't you, my love?" The question was a command. Helena nodded mechanically. The teacher understood she would get nowhere here. The conversation was blocked. The truth suffocated under layers of luxury and lies. She said her goodbyes, feeling the weight of defeat. As she walked back to her car, Veronica watched her from the door, victorious. As she started the engine, Mrs. Davis glanced one last time at the house's facade. In one of the upstairs windows, she saw a silhouette. It was Helena. For a single, fleeting second, the girl raised her hand and waved, a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture, before being pulled back, disappearing into the darkness of the room. Helena's small, desperate wave was etched into Mrs. Davis's mind the entire drive home. It wasn't a goodbye, but an SOS launched from an island of loneliness. The teacher drove her modest car through the tree-lined streets, feeling the chasm that existed between her world and that of the mansion. Inside, opulence served as acoustic insulation for a child's pain. Arriving at her small apartment, she made some tea but couldn't relax. The image of Veronica, with her calculated politeness and smooth lies, was superimposed on the fragile silhouette in the window. The teacher knew she had been defeated that afternoon, but the war for Helena's soul was far from over. She could no longer act directly. She needed an ally, someone on the inside of that fortress. Her thoughts turned to Clara, the assistant. There was something in her voice during the second call, a hesitation that cracked the armor of efficiency. Perhaps there was an opening there. The next day, gathering all her courage, Mrs. Davis called the office for a third time. When Clara answered, the teacher didn't ask to leave a message. Her voice was firm, filled with an urgency that couldn't be ignored. "Miss Clara, my name is Mrs. Davis, Helena's teacher. I visited the house yesterday, and what I saw has kept me up all night. I need to speak with you, not as Mr. Sterling's assistant, but as one woman to another. Please." The appeal worked. On the other end of the line, Clara was silent for a long moment. She was organizing Richard's return schedule, a complex web of meetings on new stock acquisitions and managing his international business. He was a man whose fortune depended on ruthless precision, and her job was to ensure nothing distracted him from that focus. But the red star on her notepad seemed to pulse. The teacher's concern was genuine, and the memory of the first Mrs. Sterling, who had once shown her a drawing from her daughter, saying, "This is my greatest treasure," spoke louder than protocol. "Meet me at the coffee shop across from the building in 20 minutes, Clara said, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. The meeting was a clash of two worlds. Mrs. Davis, in her simple coat, her face etched with worry. Clara, in her impeccably tailored suit, with the posture of someone who negotiates with billionaires. They sat at a corner table. Without preamble, the teacher told her everything. Helena's silence, Veronica's flimsy excuse about the lost drawings, the coldness in the house, and finally, the terrified wave from the window. "She's asking for help, Mrs. Davis concluded, her eyes welling up. Clara listened, her expression unreadable, but inside, the pieces were clicking into place. The small inconsistencies she had noticed in Veronica, the way she spoke of Helena when her husband wasn't around, it all began to make a terrible kind of sense. She, who managed the cash flow of a fortune, realized that the family's most precious asset was being squandered. Richard could not remain blind. When Mrs. Davis finished, Clara took a sip of her coffee. "He gets back tomorrow night," she said, her voice firm. "I can't confront him directly. Veronica is his wife. I'm just an employee. But I know Richard. He's a man of data, of proof, a teacher's words. Unfortunately, won't be enough." She paused, looking into Mrs. Davis's eyes. "But if we have something he can't ignore, something concrete, we might have a chance. I'll think of something. I need you to trust me." The day of Richard's return dawned grey. The sunlight filtered through a thick layer of clouds that mirrored the atmosphere inside the mansion. Veronica orchestrated the house like a conductor preparing for a grand premiere. The smell of orange cake, Richard's favorite, hung in the air, an olfactory trap to create the illusion of a happy home. She instructed Helena to wear an immaculate white dress that made her look even more pale and fragile. "Your father has had a tiring week, dealing with his business and all that complicated cash flow. He needs to come home to peace, not problems." A smile, "Helena, that's all I ask," she said, her voice low and threatening. As she adjusted a ribbon in the girl's hair, Helena remained docile, a porcelain doll with empty eyes, her silence and armor Veronica had not yet managed to pierce. Meanwhile, in the pulsating heart of Richard's financial empire, Clara felt time slipping through her fingers. The plan that had formed in her mind was risky, a breach of trust that could cost her job, but the image of Helena's wave propelled her forward. Surrounded by monitors displaying the frantic dance of the stock market, she knew Richard was a man who protected his assets with fierce vigilance. He had state-of-the-art security systems in his home, cameras that could be accessed remotely. He'd installed them years ago when Helena was a baby, but rarely used them. Clara, who managed every detail of his life, had the passwords. With her heart hammering against her ribs, she opened the software on her computer. The morality of the act weighed on her, but the urgency of the situation was greater. She selected the living room camera, a discreet electronic eye positioned above the fireplace. On the screen, Veronica paced back and forth, phone pressed to her ear. Clara activated the audio. The stepmother's voice was different now that she felt safe without an audience. "Mom, you have no idea. Everything is under control," she was saying with a smug laugh. "The billionaire gets in tonight, tired from chasing deals, and he'll walk into the perfect family. The girl, oh, she's been tamed. That foolish teacher came by, but I put her in her place. She finally understands that in this world, power and inheritance are what matter. Her little drama is worthless. I'm securing my future, my greatest investment, and the girl has learned to be quiet. It's amazing what a little discipline can do." Each word was a dagger, the cold, irrefutable proof Clara needed. With trembling hands, she clicked record. Hours later, the headlights of Richard's car cut through the evening darkness. The gate opened, and he stepped out, the weariness of the trip visible on his face. Veronica was waiting at the door, her smile radiant, Helena by her side, a small statue in a white dress. It was the picture Veronica had so carefully painted. "My love, welcome back," she exclaimed, opening her arms. Richard smiled, the relief of being home washing over him. He leaned in to hug his wife, the world about to return to its familiar, predictable axis. But at that exact moment, his phone vibrated in his jacket pocket. He pulled it out, expecting a final update on some investment's profitability. The message on the screen, however, wasn't about money. It was from Clara. The text was short, direct as a punch to the gut. "Richard, before you do anything else, please listen to this. It's about Helena." Attached was an audio file. He looked up from his phone, his smile frozen, and met Veronica's beaming gaze. The world wasn't returning to its axis. It was about to split in two. Time seemed to stretch and contract in that entryway. To Richard, Veronica's smile transformed into a grotesque mask, and the smell of orange cake, once comforting, now seemed sickening. The aroma of a lie. The world he knew, a universe of logic and numbers, where profit and returns were the only variables that mattered, collapsed in a single moment. He, a man who had spent the last week in luxury hotels, negotiating in dollars and euros, who understood the complexities of cryptocurrency and the whims of the stock market like the back of his hand, realized he had been completely blind to the emotional bankruptcy of his own home. He managed a net worth of hundreds of millions, but had neglected his most precious asset. With a monumental effort, he forced his lips into a semblance of a smile. "It smells wonderful, darling, but the trip was exhausting. I just need 5 minutes in my office to check one last thing before I unplug from the world." Veronica, basking in her triumph, didn't notice the dissonance. "Of course, my love. We'll be in the dining room." Helena, however, felt it. She saw the light in her father's eyes go out, the rigidity in his shoulders. She, who read the world in the subtext of emotions, sensed that the air had grown heavy, thick with an unspoken truth. Richard closed the door to his office. The sanctuary of walnut and leather where he had built his fortune. The silence was absolute. Ignoring the screens flashing with stock quotes, he sat in his leather chair, his heart racing. With a trembling finger, he pressed play. Veronica's voice filled the space, sharp, cruel, and unrecognizable. Every word was a stab. "The billionaire, securing my future, my greatest investment. The girl has been tamed." The mention of inheritance, spoken with such contempt, revealed the core of her motive. She didn't see Helena as a daughter. She saw her as an obstacle, a liability to be managed on the balance sheet of her luxurious life. The truth was a poison spreading rapidly through his veins. He turned off the audio, his hand falling heavily on the desk. The silence returned, but now it was accusatory. He looked at a photo on his desk, his late wife, smiling, holding a 3-year-old Helena in her arms. Guilt hit him with the force of a freight train. How could he not have seen? The swapped clothes, the convenient accidents, his daughter's progressive silence. He had been so focused on growing his assets, on diversifying his portfolio and securing her financial future, that he forgot to protect her emotional present. What good was all the money, all the gold in his vaults, if his daughter was living in a gilded cage? He stood up, a man transformed by the weight of that revelation. He opened the office door and walked back to the living room, where Veronica was arranging silverware on the dining table, humming. He didn't look at her. His eyes went straight to the small figure in the white dress standing near the window. Ignoring his wife, he crossed the room and knelt in front of Helena. The girl flinched instinctively, a small gesture that shattered what was left of Richard's heart. With a gentleness he didn't know he possessed, he held out his hand, not to stroke her hair, but just to let it hang there open, an invitation. Helena hesitated, then slowly placed her small hand in his. Their eyes met, and in that touch, for the first time in months, the billionaire wasn't a businessman. He was just a father, and the silent war for his daughter had just begun. The touch of Helena's small hand in his was like an electric current, a jolt of truth that coursed through Richard's body and shattered the last layer of denial. In those childish eyes, he saw the reflection of his own absence, months of a silent loneliness that none of his million-dollar investments could ever compensate for. He, the man who prided himself on his business acumen, his ability to predict the swings of the stock market, had been unable to read the balance sheet of his own family. Veronica's voice broke the sacred moment, a shrill sound in the middle of a delicate symphony. "Richard, darling, what is it? Did something happen on your trip? Dinner is going to get cold." There was a note of impatience under the layer of feigned concern. Richard stood, but he didn't let go of Helena's hand. It was his anchor, the proof that this moment was real. He looked over Veronica's head, as if she were a transparent object in the room's decor. His voice came out low, but with the weight of a final command, the same tone he used to close multi-million-dollar deals. "Helena and I are going upstairs. Don't wait for us for dinner." Without giving her a chance to respond, he guided his daughter toward the marble staircase. Each step up was an affirmation of his new priority. Veronica was left behind, frozen in the middle of the perfectly set dining room, the smell of orange cake now an insult to her defeat. The smile on her face slowly dissolved, replaced by a mask of confusion and fury. What did he know? How? Panic began to rise in her throat. In Helena's room, Richard closed the door, creating a sanctuary. The room was sterile, too tidy for a child's bedroom. There wasn't a single drawing on the walls, not a single toy out of place. It was the room of a guest, not a daughter. The sight broke his heart. He didn't sit on the bed, but on the plush carpet, bringing himself to her level. Helena watched him, her eyes wide and wary. "Forgive me, my love," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Daddy made a terrible mistake. I was so busy building our legacy, chasing more money, more profit, that I didn't see what was happening right here. No fortune in the world is worth a single one of your tears. I'm so sorry." He didn't ask her to speak, to explain. He knew words were difficult for her now. Instead, he got up and opened her closet. In the back of a drawer, under folded sweaters, he found what he was looking for, a brand new box of colored pencils with over 100 shades that he had bought on one of his trips and that Helena had never gotten to use. He also found a pad of drawing paper, still sealed. He sat back down on the floor and placed the items between them. "I know that maybe you don't want to talk, and that's okay. But if you want to show me anything, I'm here to see, just to see." Helena looked at the pencils, a universe of colors she thought she had lost forever. Then she looked at her father. She saw the genuine pain in his eyes, the silent promise of protection. Slowly, like a frightened animal emerging from its hiding place, she reached out and picked up a colored pencil. It wasn't black or gray, but a deep blue, the color of the night sky. Her small, hesitant fingers touched the blank sheet of paper. At that exact moment, the doorknob turned violently, and the door flew open with a bang. Veronica stood on the threshold, her face contorted in a mask of rage. The false concern had vanished, revealing the cold, calculating woman beneath. "Richard, I demand to know what is going on. Now." Veronica's intrusion was a breach of protocol, a violent dissonance in the sanctuary Richard was trying to rebuild. Helena's hand, holding the blue pencil, froze above the paper. The girl hunched her shoulders, her body tensing instinctively, bracing for the impact of a harsh word or a sharp gesture. But the impact never came. Richard, without turning, held up a hand, the universal gesture for stop. His voice, when he spoke, wasn't loud, but it cut through the air with the precision of a scalpel. "Get out, Veronica, now." The command was devoid of emotion, which made it all the more terrifying. It was the voice of a man who had made an irrevocable decision, the same tone he used when liquidating a failing company's stock. Veronica hesitated. Her world, built on the solid foundation of Richard's fortune, was trembling. She had underestimated the bond between father and daughter, treating it as a liability in her life plan, when in fact it was his primary asset. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's going on." "What did that little school teacher put in your head?" she insisted, her voice rising an octave, bordering on hysterical. It was a fatal miscalculation. By mentioning Mrs. Davis, she confirmed that she knew of the outside concern and had deliberately ignored it. Richard rose slowly, placing himself between Veronica and his daughter, a human shield. He finally turned to face her, and in his eyes there was no longer the confusion of before, but a cold, cutting clarity. "You are in no position to demand anything. Not in this house, not anymore." He pulled his phone from his pocket, opened the audio file, and turned up the volume. Her own voice, smug and cruel, echoed through the quiet room. "The billionaire gets in tonight. The girl's been tamed. Securing my future, my greatest investment." Every word was a shovelful of dirt on the coffin of their marriage. Veronica's face cycled through a range of colors, from the red of fury to the pale white of shock. Denial was useless. The proof was there, irrefutable, ringing in her own ears. She tried to stammer out an explanation, to blame her mother, the stress, but the words died in her mouth. The mask of the perfect wife and dedicated stepmother disintegrated, revealing the naked face of greed. Richard didn't wait for her empty excuses. "You have 1 hour to pack your things and get out of my house. My lawyer will be in contact with yours. The prenup we signed is crystal clear about what happens in cases of emotional abuse. Your investment, Veronica, has just gone bankrupt." He took her gently by the arm, led her out of Helena's room, and closed the door, leaving her in the hallway with the truth of her actions echoing around her. Then he locked the door from the inside. The click of the lock was the final sound, the punctuation mark on a closed chapter. He turned back to Helena, who was watching him with wide eyes, a mixture of fear and awe. Richard knelt again, his face softened by pain and relief. "It's over, my love. I promise. No one will ever hurt you again." He pointed to the blank paper. "Now, if you want to, you can show me how you feel." With a hand that was still trembling slightly, Helena finally lowered the tip of the blue pencil and began to draw. The first stroke wasn't a sad line or a scribble of anger. It was the outline of a small circle in the bottom corner of the page. A beginning. The sound of the lock clicking was the final word in an era of falsehood. Outside, in the hallway, they heard hurried footsteps, then the sound of a door slamming forcefully downstairs. Richard didn't move. He and Helena remained in their cocoon of silence. The outside world, with its noises of anger and departure, seeming distant and irrelevant. Minutes later, the sound of a car engine starting and tires crunching on the gravel reached them faintly, the last echo of a storm that was finally passing. Richard felt a wave of relief so overwhelming it almost made him dizzy. He, a man who had built a fortune by staying calm while the stock market crashed, now felt completely vulnerable, stripped of his defenses. All his capital, all his businesses, seemed childish compared to the monumental task ahead, rebuilding his daughter's trust. On the carpet, the blue pencil began its journey. The small circle Helena drew was the epicenter from which her world began to expand again. She worked with the concentration Richard rarely saw outside of his boardrooms. He didn't rush her, didn't ask questions. He just watched, bearing witness to creation. The blue circle became a pond. Next to the pond, she drew a small figure with stick-like arms and a round head. Then she hesitated and looked up at him, a silent question in her eyes. Richard understood. He pointed to the paper. "May I?" he asked softly. She nodded. Picking up a brown pencil, next to the first figure, he drew another, larger one, clumsy but clearly protective. He felt foolish, a billionaire drawing like a child, but he had never felt more authentic. Helena looked at the two figures side by side, and a tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips before vanishing. It was the most valuable dividend Richard had ever earned in his entire life. He realized that true wealth wasn't stored in vaults or diversified in investment funds. It was here, in this fragile moment, in the ability to connect with another human being. He had spent years building a legacy of assets, when the only treasure that mattered was quietly breaking just a few feet away from him. The guilt was still there, a heavy liability on his emotional balance sheet, but for the first time he felt he had the tools to start paying it off. After a long time, Helena put the blue pencil down. The drawing showed the two figures holding hands, looking at the blue pond under a smiling yellow sun. It was simple, but it contained a universe of hope. She stood up, and Richard thought she was going to her bookshelf, but instead she walked with determined steps to her closet. She opened the door and, from a dark corner in the back, pulled out a worn shoebox. She carried it with the solemnity of someone carrying a sacred artifact and placed it on the floor between her and her father. Her eyes met his, and with a slow gesture, she removed the lid. Richard's heart stopped. Inside, in a tangle of torn colors and broken lines, was the mutilated soul of his daughter. The remains of hundreds of drawings he never knew had been destroyed. It was the physical proof of the methodical cruelty he had allowed to happen under his own roof. The air left his lungs in a hiss of pain. If the audio had been a stab, the box of torn drawings was the twisting of the blade in his chest. Richard felt the air rush out of his lungs, a sibilant sound of pure pain. He, a man who measured the world in assets and liabilities, who had built a fortune on the cold analysis of data, now stared at the most devastating liability of his life, his daughter's pain, meticulously documented in those scraps of paper. They weren't just drawings, they were the profit and loss reports of a childhood, and the final balance was a catastrophe. With trembling hands, he reached out a finger and touched the ragged edge of a yellow sun. He remembered seeing that same sun taped to the refrigerator years ago. This piece of paper in his hand wasn't a mere doodle. It was a relic from a happy time, desecrated. The guilt crushed him. His entire net worth, every stock, every gold bar, felt like toxic waste in that moment. What good was being a billionaire if he couldn't protect the only inheritance that truly mattered? He looked up at Helena, expecting to see accusation, but there was none. There was only a quiet waiting. She saw the agony on his face, the genuine pain that wasn't about himself, but about her. And in that instant, she knew she could trust him with the last and heaviest secret. Her small hand went back to the box of colored pencils. She didn't pick the blue of hope or the yellow of joy. She chose a brown pencil, the color of wet earth, and a red one, the color of a glowing ember. On the back of the drawing they had made together, she began a new one. Richard watched, his heart in a tight knot. She drew a mug, large and disproportionate. With the brown pencil, she made a dark liquid spill from the rim in a downward arc. Below the arc, she drew a small figure, the same one that represented her. And then, with the red pencil, she made small dashes on the figure's arm and shoulder, like flames or splatters of pain. Finally, she drew the figure's face. The eyes were two large smudges of blue tears. And there was no mouth. Richard frowned, trying to decipher the pictogram of her suffering. An accident. Had she spilled coffee on herself? But the face, the mouthless face, and the eyes that screamed in silence, told another story. Then, the memory hit him like lightning, a recollection he had filed away as trivial. One afternoon, weeks ago, he'd come home to find Helena wearing a long-sleeved sweater, despite the heat. But she was playing and got a little scrape in the garden, didn't want to scare you with the boo-boo, Veronica had explained with a reassuring smile. He had accepted it, unquestioning. Now, that memory connected to the drawing with horrifying clarity. The brown liquid, the red splashes, the long sleeves to hide it. It wasn't a scrape, it wasn't an accident, it was a punishment. Heat flooded his face, a mix of fury and shame so intense it made him nauseous. He looked at his daughter's arm, now covered by the sleeve of her white dress, imagining the scar that might lie beneath, a mark that went far deeper than the skin. He finally understood the depth of the abyss Helena had been living in. He looked up from the paper and met her eyes. The girl watched him, still, waiting. Her expression didn't ask, "Do you believe me?" but something far more profound. "Now that you know everything, what are you going to do?" Helena's silent question hung in the air, heavier than any word, and Richard's answer came not as a promise, but as action. The rage he felt was cold and precise, the same clarity of thought he had before a major stock acquisition. But this time, the asset to be protected was infinitely more valuable. With a gentleness that contrasted with the storm inside him, he pointed to his daughter's arm. "Sweetheart, can Daddy see?" "I promise I'll be careful." Helena hesitated for a second. Then, with a newfound trust, she extended her arm. Richard pushed up the sleeve of the white dress with the tenderness of someone handling the most fragile art. And there it was, on the soft skin of her shoulder, a faded pinkish mark, the calligraphy of a cruelty he had refused to read for far too long. He said nothing. He simply brought her arm to his lips and placed a soft kiss on the scar, an act of penance and a silent oath. From that moment on, Richard moved with ruthless efficiency. He picked up his phone and made 3 calls. The first was to his lawyer. "Mark," he said, his voice firm as steel, "initiate divorce proceedings. Invoke Clause 7B of the prenup, emotional and physical abuse of my daughter. I want the asset division executed to the fullest extent of the law. Helena's trust fund is secure, but I want to ensure Veronica's access to anything remotely connected to our family is severed permanently." The second call was to Mrs. Davis, the teacher. He apologized with a humility that surprised her and thanked her with a sincerity that moved her. "You were the only one who saw," he said. "I will be forever in your debt." The third call was to Clara. "Clara, cancel all my meetings for the foreseeable future. Delegate everything. The priority now is Helena. And thank you. You saved my daughter." In the days that followed, the mansion, once a mausoleum of silent wealth, began to breathe. The sound of Veronica's high heels was replaced by the soft scratch of Helena's pencils on paper. Richard learned to make breakfast. His first attempt at pancakes was a disaster, but Helena laughed, a rusty sound like a gate that hadn't been opened in a long time. And to Richard, the sound of that laughter was the most precious dividend he had ever received. He learned to make warm, not hot, coffee served in mugs with colorful silicone lids, so she would never again be frightened by the steam. He transformed the old music room, where the grand piano gathered dust, into an art studio for Helena, covering the walls with corkboard so she could pin up all her drawings. The house, once a stage for pain, was becoming a haven for healing. Helena's drawings changed. The shrunken figures gave way to suns with open arms, to houses with chimneys that puffed smoke in the shape of hearts. She began to hum softly as she drew. One day, Richard found her standing in front of the large hallway mirror, once a symbol of Veronica's vanity. But Helena wasn't looking at herself. With a piece of tape, she had stuck one of her new drawings right in the middle of the glass. Two figures, one large and one small, holding hands with the caption, "Daddy and Me." Richard felt a lump in his throat. He wasn't just getting his daughter back. He was becoming, for the first time, the father she had always deserved. One afternoon, as they were watering the garden, the mail carrier delivered the post. Amid the bills and business magazines was a manila envelope with an official seal from the City Arts Council. Richard opened it, curious. Inside was a letter and a colorful brochure. His eyes scanned the lines, and his expression shifted from curiosity to shocked surprise, and then to a smile of pure pride. He looked over at Helena, who was chasing a butterfly, and knew their journey was about to take a turn he could never have imagined. Richard held the paper, the official crest of the Arts Council, looking strangely out of place among his business mail. The letter was a formal invitation. The city's annual arts program, titled Voices of Our City, had selected a drawing by a student from a local private academy to be part of its main exhibition. The student was Helena Sterling. The piece, the letter explained, had been submitted months earlier by her teacher, Mrs. Davis, and was chosen by a jury for its profound emotional honesty and expressive use of color. The drawing in question was one of the last Helena had made before her sketchbook was destroyed. A large, grey house under a dark rain cloud, but with a single, stubborn yellow flower growing beside the door. Richard felt the air catch in his throat. His daughter's voice, which had been silenced and torn apart, was about to be put on display for the entire city to see, not as a cry of pain, but as a work of art. He walked slowly out to the garden, where Helena was now making a daisy chain. He knelt on the grass beside her. "Helena," he said, his voice full of an emotion he didn't try to hide. "Remember that drawing you made of our house with the little yellow flower?" She nodded, her eyes suddenly wary. "People loved it so much that they want to put it in an exhibition in a special place so everyone can see what an amazing artist you are." What happened next was the true measure of her healing. Helena didn't shrink or look away. A slow, genuine, and radiant smile spread across her face, lighting her up from within. She didn't say a word, but her eyes said everything. The silent plea she had been drawing for so long, "See me," had finally been answered. Richard, the man who once measured success in dividends and profitability, discovered in that instant that the greatest fortune in the world, the only treasure that truly mattered, was the light in his daughter's eyes. The night of the exhibition was a landmark. Hand in hand, they walked through the crowded gallery, and there it was, on a prominent wall, Helena's drawing, framed and lit. It looked even more powerful. The dark cloud told a story, but the small yellow flower shouted about resilience. People stopped, looked, and whispered about the strength in the simple image. Mrs. Davis was there, her eyes shining with pride. She hugged Helena, and the circle of care and protection came closed. That night, Richard made one final change to the house. He took down an expensive abstract painting from the main living room wall, one that Veronica had bought at auction. In its place, he hung a new frame. Inside, it was not the drawing from the exhibition, but the first one he and Helena had made together on the bedroom carpet. The two clumsy figures, holding hands, looking at a blue pond. It was simple, perhaps even childish, but it was true. It was the founding charter of their new life. Later, sitting on the sofa, silence filled the room. but it was a different kind of silence, a warm, comfortable quiet, filled with peace. They sipped warm cocoa from two identical mugs. Helena leaned against her father, and for the first time in a very long time, her voice came out clear and steady, not a whisper, but a statement. "Daddy, can we draw the ocean tomorrow?" Richard hugged her tightly, feeling the tears of gratitude in his eyes. He looked at the new picture on the wall, at the daughter safe in his arms, and understood that the greatest deal he had ever made in his life involved no money and no stock. It was the exchange of an empty fortune for a wealth that was priceless.